Austin's going to be moderating, so I will let him take it away.
Awesome. So thank you for coming to our grants panel. We did this because this is what many students say they wanted from the GSO, so here we are. We have some great professionals in the community here with us today. So if you guys could just introduce yourself, what you do, how long you've been doing it, if you've done anything interesting before you do what you currently do, and whatever else you want to start off by saying.
Okay, hi. My name is Alicia Beekman. I am the Director of Youth Services for Mothers and Babies Perinatal Network. I'll be there 16 years this November. I went to undergrad in SUNY Cortland and did an internship teaching students how to say no to sexual activity and loved it. So kind of found a job in that, and that's what I oversee now is all the pregnancy prevention programming for middle and high school youth. We cover 8 counties as an agency, so we're busy and we drive all over the place. We see a lot of different kids from a lot of different walks of life, which is exciting as well. Something exciting before?
Or if you've done other work with grants or cool fact about yourself.
Being in a nonprofit, we're like 85% grant funded. So the word grants has been in my vocabulary since I started back in '99 and have learned what that really means. I came in and they said, okay, well the grant says go do this. And now I understand why it says go do this and where we got the grant from and how we write them. So it's been a learning curve and it continues to be a learning curve, but I'm definitely more involved now than I used to be. So that's it for me.
My name is Jerry Putman. I'm the Executive Director, CEO of the Dr. G. Clifford and Florence B. Decker Foundation for short. We're the largest private foundation in Broome County, and I've been with them for 13 years, all 13 as the CEO. Before that, I was the Senior Vice President of Economic Development and Public Policy at New York State Electric and Gas. I have no background in grant writing or no background in grants or no background in not-for-profits. You can understand that working for a utility company. But my background is I have a Bachelor of Technology degree because we didn't have an engineering school at BU when I went, and I have an MBA, both from Binghamton University. So I am an alum. As I said, we're the largest private foundation in Broome County, and we do a lot of grant making. We are a $35 million foundation, been in existence since 1979, and we've given away since 1981 $35 million to this community in various forms of grants. So I'm excited to be here. I think it's great. We did this a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago now, with another group, and it was a lot of fun. So thanks for asking me to be here.
Welcome. So start off, is there a type of grant that is the most valuable type of grant for an organization to acquire?
I'll take that answer for organization piece. We're about 85% grant funded. So when we look for grants to help sustain us, and pretty much where we started were through state grants. The New York State Department of Health is where we get a lot of our money, the Bureau of Maternal and Child Health, the Office of Children and Family Services. So they're different bureaus within New York State. And they cover different pieces of programming that we do, child abuse prevention, pregnancy prevention, prenatal and perinatal care. So that's where a lot of our grants started and still continue to this day. We've also looked into federal grants, and the reason we do the state and the federal grants, they're large grants and they kind of come in a 5-year pocket of money. So typically once you're funded, unless something changes at the state or federal level, you're pretty much, I hate to use the word guaranteed, but you're close to guaranteed that money, the same money each year for 5 years or 3 years, whatever the cycle may be. So that takes a lot of stress off once we are given the grant, that we know at least we have 5 years to start, implement, and complete a project, or during that time look for continuing money to keep that project going. So I guess we're valuable that way. Our resources going in and the return is great. So, but there are a lot of others that are very important, such as foundations for local pieces and to tie the community together and understand what a nonprofit is and what a foundation is, have the state understand that we're working with everybody as well. So it's not just we're in a silo, and if their money goes away, everything stops. We want to show them that you can maybe help us start it, and then other money can help it keep going. And they might have more buy-in because of our success rate. So value can be defined a lot of different ways, I think.
Yeah, I think it can too. And, you know, from the foundation standpoint, a grant that is valuable, in my opinion, is a grant that helps both the organization and the foundation. We as foundations have goals that we're trying to achieve. We have a mission that we're trying to satisfy. So a valuable goal or grant to us is one that helps us further our mission, at the same time helping you as an organization succeed. And there is a lot of state money that comes around, and a lot of it is requires a challenge. And we have the opportunity to meet that challenge through the grants that we make. So, but value, it's really in the eyes of the beholder, but I look at a grant as one that helps us and helps you.
Great, and if we could just welcome our newest panelists, if you could just introduce yourself, your title, position, fun facts, anything you'd like.
Well, I'm very rudely late. I'm Jen O'Brien. I'm the Executive Director of the Magic Paintbrush Project and the Project Coordinator for the Art Space at Recreation Park. And I also do regional economic development grants for upstate shredding and white companies.
So the question we just asked was, is there such thing as a most valuable grant for an organization?
Repeating.
Yeah. What?
Repeating ones.
Oh.
Ones that keep looping.
Very cool. So the next question is, what's it like to write and review grants? Of course, it's probably easy, more fun to be on the reviewing side. Is that right? From your experience, what's the process like? What are some frustrations you have with the process? What are some triumphs you've had with the process? And like, you know, where are you guys at now professionally as individuals with viewing grants and grant writing?
I'll start. First of all, I have the luxury of not having to write grants because we don't raise money. We use the endowment that we have to provide grants. But I have written grants in my former life. Even in NICEAG, we had a not-for-profit arm of which I was the president, and we used to write grants for monies to help customers and to help local organizations. In writing a grant, remember one thing, and people, it's a misnomer to a lot of people, but foundations have to give away money. That's why we're in business. A lot of times people are reluctant to come to a foundation because they say, well, they won't give me a grant. We have to give away money every year. And we have to give away at least 5% of our income, of our endowment, or we get fined by the IRS. So we have it's a two-way street. We have to give it away and you need it. So, but in writing the grant, I think you need to make sure that you're writing the grant both for the passion that you have in your organization, as well as meeting the mission. I'll talk about mission a lot of the foundation. For example, the Decker Foundation, we'll call ourselves a bricks and mortar foundation. We do capital projects. We don't do operating expenses. We don't do programs because most of the time it requires salaries. We don't fund salaries. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But so you need to make sure that when you're writing a grant, that you're writing it for what the mission of the organization, of the foundation is. And you've got to be able to articulate your passion for your organization. You have to tell the story. And a lot of times that's what the grant writing is. You're telling the story about your organization so that the person that's reviewed on the other end, me, is going to say, wow, this is a worthwhile organization and we ought to be funding it.
I like to think of writing a grant like writing a paper. That's what you guys are used to right now. There are guidelines, and we have to see if the guidelines fit our mission. And as Jerry said, you want to write it for the passion and for the mission of the foundation or the grant giver, but also for if we receive it, is it going to be something that we can truly do? We shouldn't just write it just to write it. And does it fit our mission? Is it going to be something that aligns with everything else that we're doing so that we can show sustainability and get the support from other foundations or other funding streams. One of the most recent ones that I did write was to the Shenango County United Way. We have a Broome County United Way as well. And just the guidelines right here, like make sure it's 8.5 by 11 on plain white paper. I mean, very specific things. Make sure it's 12.5, 1-inch margins. Make sure you attach all this stuff. If you don't, they take points off. You're graded basically on it. So, and that's not true for everyone. Sometimes they look and it's just, it fits the mission and it's a go. Other times they really score because they might receive hundreds of applications. So in those situations, I wouldn't want to be a reviewer. Because there's so many to go through and some could be very similar. So people use rubrics to kind of go through and figure out what did the criteria, was it met? Did they write it in the right format? Did they attach everything they needed to attach? Being on the end of writing sometimes, I'm glad I write them sometimes. I'm glad I don't have to write them for my job to be my only job. A lot of nonprofits, the grant writer, they have to write them to support their role. And that's, I think, a lot of stress. So I get to go talk about sex ed and then write a grant once in a while. So I get the best of both worlds, I think. But it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of work preparing to write one. Are we answering this piece right now? It takes just a lot of like research, a lot of, does it align with the mission? What's the criteria? What data do they require? Are they giving us data? Some grants give us everything and say, pick here, 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 and here, and tell us how you're gonna make it all work. And others are like blank slate, tell us what you're gonna do. So those are sometimes more time consuming because we have to find all the data to prove our point. We can't just say, we know teens are getting pregnant in this area, give us money, we'll go tell them to stop. You know, so we have to show data that is proving those points. So very time consuming on our end. And we may look at what the amount is that we want and base that on our decision to write it or not, or when it's due and when we learn of it. Sometimes we learn it's due in 3 days. Okay, what are you doing for 3 days? Well, apparently nothing else but writing this, or stopping and saying that we don't have time right now. So let's look for something later and work on our presentation of what we can do now to use that for later. So a lot of variables going on.
That's good. I'm going to take this from, since I do the not-for-profit piece, I'll touch on that very quickly, and then I'm going to go maybe to help you guys out because I work actually, I've written millions of dollars of grants in the last year for for-profit companies, which is a whole different beast. And doing two at the same time, I can tell you there's similarities. I'm a puzzle person. I like good puzzles. I start at the same place. I mean, everybody does it. I know Diane Brown says it all the time, but the Stephen Covey begin with the end in mind. I mean, there's some truth in that statement. And so if we have an identified need, then you have to go back out and figure out what resources are available for that identified need. That is consistent regardless of which industry I'm writing grants for. I write it for the not-for-profit, I write it for municipalities, and I write for private for-profit companies. That is a commonality between all three, and it's a commonality. Another big thing is whether or not it can be ethically and transparently contracted. I will not write or submit a single grant that I do not think can be ethically and transparently contracted, because every grant is a contract. It's an investment they want to return. You need to be able to measure that return, just like the stock market, and you need to be able to prove that that return has the impact of the investment's purpose. And that's very, very crucial to how I actually word things, how I go at it, how I choose. There's a reason why Decker's never gotten a grant from Magic Paintbrush Project, because I know they're bricks and mortar. But I do need to talk to you about the park. But knowing your resources and knowing where the money comes from is really important about how you go into it. I don't even know if I'm really answering the question right now. So I've been on the reviewer end as well. It is an unpleasant experience for me because I don't like judging it. Everybody states a really good case. So I like the fact I get to write them. I kind of think of it as fishing. I do not take it personally when I get a no at all. I'll get 10 no's for every yes. You know, and when the yeses come, that's great. When I actually see the program up and running and doing what it's supposed to do, that's when the bells and the whistles and the balloons go off. But that's when I breathe a little bit easier about it. You must be detail oriented. And I'll shut up after this one point, but this is a really good example. City of Binghamton wants to move the carousel at Ross Park Zoo because it's down in a hole. So we decided to move it up. Well, we found out that it costs a pretty penny, almost $700,000 to do what we want to do. There's only 3 places in the US that does this. So the Regional Economic Development Council caps their projects at $500,000, which by the time you're done with your match is $668,000. Mr. Flanagan was my middle school math teacher. I love him today more than I ever did then, because I always go back to some of some basic algebra. It's like X and Y, how do you do that? Because you got to make sure the numbers work. Well, we're basically $200 and something thousand short of matching money, right? So what do? You start with Google. And I Googled who restores this, and I ended up getting extra money and a grant request. I put that you asked the company, the grantor, the company with the foundation, in this case, if we're a match, they came back and said, absolutely. I never thought Tiffany and Company was interested in doing this particular thing, which is urban park restoration and art. We're a perfect match for them. Thank God for page 5 of Google. Never go to page 1, 2, and 3, go to 5. That's where I normally start. And it's just a habit of mine. So you have to just be brave enough to ask the question. And that question needs to be in response to the guidelines and the problem that you have and in your funding sources. Does that make any sense to anybody? And I could give you 10 examples of why that worked. But you know, with any luck, the REDC says yes, and Tiffany says yes, and 3 years from now, you guys will be going around in circles.
It's an interesting idea, grant as a contract, and looking at it legally, whether you're on the reviewing side of a grant or you're the one writing the grant. Have you ever had contracts are made so when people break laws, they are reprimanded or there's a consequence and it's written out? Have you ever been on the side of it where one side is not sticking to what the grant should be doing, or is breaking that contract? And if so, how did you handle that? And what was your role? And what greater questions as a public administrator did you have to ask yourself and or ask others?
I would yes. New York State broke the contract. I mean, they simply broke the contract. It was at a PWDD. They sent out a certain amount of money and then they changed the rule after our contract was done. And they changed all of the contracts for what they call voluntary agencies by 10%. And they cut all the funding by 10% across the board, even though we already had a contract and budgeted on X amount of dollars.
And they still expect you to do the same.
They actually
work
more.
but take 10% of your money.
And they
Or
added,
and more, right?
we ended up paying almost 78 cents on the dollar for administering all of the requirements due to the transparency requirements New York State has now. That was a huge issue. And how we were able to solve it, frankly, was with people like the Decker and the Hoyt Foundation got together, the Community Foundation, and put together a series where you put those classes together. And then I made my board attend, so I get to publicly thank you for that. It actually had an impact where I got to educate my board. Because my board, in this case, is a group of 12 not-for-profit volunteers who just took on full fiduciary responsibility for anything that happened in that workshop and they aren't in the room. Someone slips, falls, or breaks their arm, who gets sued? We don't pay our workers' compensation, who gets it on their mortgage? The board of directors. So because of that law change, and that was not in our contract. And so having to go back and we had to decide with the organization whether or not we wanted to stay in that contractual agreement. We ended up doing it. It's because we had good education, but that was how we did it. But that was that's a clear example of your question, I think.
In a different kind of angle of that, we used to receive money from the Office of Children and Family Services. We received $266,000 a year for Broome County only. It's a big chunk of change as far as grants go from the state. They're nowhere near that now. And with that, we took it and then subcontracted that money out because we wanted to keep true to our mission and get kids in counseling, but we don't provide counseling services. So we would give money to Family and Children's Society. So we had to subcontract. So we were a subcontractor from the state, and then we then subcontracted money out to other people to carry on these pieces that we could not do. So we had probably 5 or 6 different subcontractors, but there were times when they broke their contract, you know, and it wasn't a legal binding. It was more of a, we're going to give you this money, but if you don't do A, B, and C, we're not going to give it to you anymore. And there were some subcontractors who stopped doing C or didn't do all of B and were merging things together and still requesting their money. So we had to go and have this very frank discussion and say, you haven't done this and you're kind of using this instead of this, and so we are no longer going to fund you. Which sometimes, you know, a door closes, a window opens, or something opens, right? And so we had that money, we moved it into something else, and it turned into some really great programming, which might not have happened if we didn't have to tell someone no. Agency-wide, sometimes we requested grants and we had a really great plan and we just couldn't get pieces done, so we have to give the money back. We don't like to do that, but if we're not using it for what we're using it, what we originally stated, then we do. So.
We have a policy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we do have a policy, at least at the Magic Paintbrush Life is Watchful, that until all the contract requirements are completed successfully, that money is held. So we have enough in reserves to kind of do that. We don't like, but we're only, we're not that old, and we have a tiny little budget, so we just don't spend money we don't have, but we have a program. We just don't spend the money that we don't have yet, but we hold that money in reserve until we've completed all of the contract left, and then we kind of repay ourselves back in. And that has served us well, especially with New York State, because every so often we have to throw a check back at them. Right? They just send checks they didn't mean to send, so.
And Jerry, as someone who's a CEO of like a very large foundation in the area, do you ever grant grants and then a year later say, wait, whoa, like that's not what happened, you didn't agree to your part of the grant?
Oh, yeah. Not very often, but we have done that. We've had 1 or 2 grants since I've been there where the organization decided to use the money for something other than what we gave them the money for. And in one case, we made them pay it back. And for a not-for-profit with a small budget, if you're going after them for $10,000 or $20,000, or that's a huge hit. But at the same time, we provide a contract to everybody that must be signed by the CEO and the board president. So both the board of directors and the CEO know what the rules are. So at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, they can't say they didn't know about it. In one particular case, though, we had a similar issue, and and again, going back to the point where I say we're in the business to give away money, and we allowed the organization to apply for a grant for the thing that they did that they weren't supposed to do, and we granted them the money so that they could go ahead and pay for what they had done and still do what they originally had intended to do. So, we've helped them both ways, but it really depends on the organization and the quality of the grant. It all comes back to the quality of the grant.
One last question, and then we'll open up to questions for everyone else. We touched on this before, but how do you find grants? How do you find grantees? Is there a lot of searching on Google? Are there other tools that you use? And how do you differentiate between a legitimate grant and a legitimate organization and a not so legitimate grant and a not so legitimate organization?
It's extremely difficult. It's one of the hardest things that I've had to focus on. And the reason being is that, number one, we're a bricks and mortar foundation. We're capital projects. There's not a lot of organizations around this area that can afford to build buildings. And in fact, I've just had the ability to change our board's thinking about how we do that, because there's so many commercial buildings around here. I said, we need to let some of these organizations buy the building rather than having to go build a building. We give away $1.5 million every year in Broome County. And I can tell you that this year we're running a little bit short of grantees. And so I'm out meeting with the organizations. Everybody's writing this down. Call Jerry tomorrow. So I'm out, I meet with grantees periodically. I'm in the community. I live here, and I've lived here all my life, so that I have a sense as to what's going on. And so I can go meet with folks, and we can talk about some of their needs. And in several instances, I've gone to the organization, we've talked about what's going on, and I say, hey, why don't you apply for a grant for that? And in this case, we've got, we were probably $500,000 short going into our last grant cycle. And I've got about $700,000 worth of grants coming in. So, I mean, but you've got to,
Aren't you glad you came?
and they've got to be, again, they've got to be good grants. You know, the hardest thing is evaluating a grant that comes in, because there's a lot of worthwhile organizations out there, but there are some that just shouldn't exist. And either they're not sustainable over time, they don't have a great track record, and you've got to weed them out. And that's not easy to do when someone's tugging at your heartstrings saying, I need money. And they're doing something good for the community. But sometimes we have to do that. And just one other issue on that, state money. New York State is notorious for asking organizations who are doing a good job to develop another program, because they see a need in the community, and they'll say, will you do this? So they'll go to mothers and babies and they'll say, will you run this program for us? We will fund it for a certain period of time. And not only does mothers and babies have to wait for the funding, because you don't get it right away, you got to fund it yourself and then they'll pay you back. But a couple of years down the road, the administration will change and the state will say, well, we're not sure we can fund your program anymore. You go out and find your own funding. It's the worst thing in the world that can happen to a not-for-profit, but it happens, I tell you, every day of the week, because it's just easy to take away things that you're not totally responsible for. And these organizations, I feel sorry for them, because they're trying to find money to pay people's salaries. We don't pay people's salaries, so we can't help them. And but it's a common problem in this state, and I'm sure it's a common problem all across the country. But it's something to look out for when you're getting state money.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a good place, like I said, a good place to start sometimes, because they're bigger funds and maybe you want to get something off the ground. But everything that Jerry just said happened to us. Our pregnancy prevention, our governor at the time, Spitzer, we had abstinence only money, and he said abstinence is stupid, basically, and he said New York State doesn't want to take this money anymore. It made one fell swoop and it was gone. So 30 contractors throughout the state, including us, just our money stopped. So talk about a contractor and just, nope, no more. So we knew that there was still an issue. There's all these new kids coming up who are going to hear and need to hear this messaging. So we had to find other funding, and that's when we started to look elsewhere and realize the state's not always going to be in our corner. And there's no word guarantee tied to them. So it's a learning curve, like every day, everything changes and how we look at things. So. To add to where to look, I mean, you mentioned Google.
Sure,
It's there, use it, right? There's also a lot of other places, Network for Good, GuideStar. We look at annual reports a lot. We have our own annual report, and in the end, in the back, we'll say, thank you to all of our donors, and we will put thank you to everyone who has made this possible, government, foundation, corporate support. We list everybody there. Look, Decker Foundation. So, Decker Foundation is in here. And a lot of other foundations and a lot of other state money, and so does a lot of other nonprofits in their newsletters or in their annual reports. So we will stalk them and find them through Google and look at their annual reports and see, oh, they're similar to our mission in this piece, and they funded them, maybe they'll fund us. The GuideStar piece, it's a login, and then you can look at an agency's profile. And that might help weed out too for someone who's looking at a grant to see, are they a reputable agency? Do they file taxes? Do they have clean audits? What's their overall budget? Are they in the red? All these things. And you can look at their 990. And on the 990 for foundations, we might look and see who they have given their money to, because Jerry said they have to give it away, right? So give it to us. So we're gonna look and see who can take that. And so the 990s will show us, to give to the Boys and Girls Club, we work with teams, they work with teams, maybe they'll give us something. So I keep going to teams because that's where I go, but this is how we would look for Network for Good. Charity Navigator is another site out there, and that is a great one if you are looking to invest money. And I don't want to, when we see all these GoFundMe things on Facebook and social media, and you hear some really sad stories, and you hear like someone just wanted new boots. I mean, it's horrible, and they set up a GoFundMe page for new boots or like a wardrobe or something crazy. But you can look at Charity Navigator and see who are reputable agencies to give to if you have a lot of money. If you know those people, have them call me. Grants.gov. Yes.
She needs.
No, if they have a lot of money. She can work on it. Grants.gov is another, and some of those are bigger state, federal kind of grants. So those are great. Word of mouth. Jerry just told us they're thinking new stuff. We both wrote that down. Okay, we're gonna call Jerry because we might need something that in our current building as opposed to building a new one. Visuals in town. I mean, you've been to Wegmans. Subs are wrapped in there, right? I mean, it's a great place, but the big concrete checks on the wall. Wegmans gets money. So how do we get that? How do we get it from Weiss? How do we get it from places? So I'm always looking, and I'll look and see, like, why is this building called what it is? Or why is it the Decker building? Decker funded them. So, like, how did that happen? So I'm always looking, and I'm not even a grant writer, but I'm always looking, like, how big is their name on the wall? And if we put their name on our wall, how much do they get? So we put their name on the wall. I mean, for real, we have to look for salaries sometimes. So we are really looking at all these avenues.
I'll say for us, we have a policy that no more than 30% of our income every year can come from state money. And also, whatever we get in state money must also be matched in the checking account and the savings account. We worked really hard to get into that savings account. And how we got there, frankly, was Wendy's Walk for Kids. We got a Wendy's Walk for Kids one year, and it was a beautiful thing because it was unrestricted money, and that's kind of that's a great little place for us because it almost matched perfectly our state contract. And so we were too young and too little and too small and too fragile to not be very, very careful. And as crazy as I am with throwing paint all over the place, I am the most risk intolerant person I've ever met. I don't want to endanger anybody. So where we find grants, we also have another policy, and it's a real policy, is don't ask for what you don't need. So there are many, many organizations that will hear of a grant opportunity. They will write the grant in a competitive process. They will get the grant, and then they scramble really hard to build a program to it. And it has, Frank, and maybe I'm out in activity, I'm talking out of school, but kind of. It's kind of made the foundations much more protective of your process. And everybody.
And it's detrimental to not only the agency who couldn't pull that off, but to the area.
Yeah.
And you're looking at larger grants, you're like, oh, well, we funded someone from there and they weren't good. Well, we're not all them,
Right.
But we're lumped sometimes. Oh, the nonprofit world, and there's a stigma with things that could be attached very quickly.
So I just wanted to break into, because I know a lot of people would rather, that is all very good. It's true. I live it every day. But if I were to do my for-profit grant writing job, where do I find grants for Adam Weitzman? Okay, Adam is an interesting individual. A lot of people follow him on Facebook. He's interesting to work for. I actually like him. And he is.
That's not who he is.
Adam Weitzman owns Upstate Shredding and Ben Weitzman Recycling, 16 locations throughout New York and Pennsylvania. We're right now working on 2 major build projects. The one I can talk about at this time has to do with taking the wire that comes in through the scrap process, taking the plastic off of it, and basically putting it through a process and rating it back to whatever metal, whether it be copper, titanium, whatever. It's a really interesting process. I never knew I was going to know about this. I work with disabled individuals, but I can tell you the chemical breakdown in the process of a microscale processor. How? I do not know. It happened overnight through osmosis, drooling on all the paperwork I was trying to read through. But he needed he wanted federal and state support. He saw other companies getting it. He wanted to get into that. And it all comes through grants, tax incentives, and other programs like that. And because I've successfully written a couple RUC grants before I got involved, I'm just one of the team. There's lots of lawyers involved. But how we did look for it is I went to grants.gov. I started looking at the industry, reading every single thing I could about the scrap metal industry, about the wire industry, about the recycling industry. And one thing kind of led to another thing, and then we found different programs to apply for. That's really how that went. And it was like casting a net out and seeing what happened, and then gauging the different responses. It's also extremely political. So it's been very interesting to watch the society influences of it, what the cultural influences of each of the different places. Buffalo is very different from Syracuse. Syracuse is very different from here. If there are regional decisions, and you need to know the regional culture in order to write to that thing. And let me tell you, it's very different. Rochester's even funnier. So
that comes like our state grant. They think we're all the same throughout the state. Like we're not the same as New York City. We're not the same as Rochester. They're huge compared to here. But to fight the same fight and say we have teens here who need to hear about sex ed and making better decisions, you might not get as many teens for the same amount of. So we have to always make our fight a little bigger because they lump us with New York State across the board, and we're not New York State. We're South Central New York. So we have to make that argument. You mentioned a political piece. We said Planned Parenthood here, they're not family planning. They broke away from their funding stream because of political pieces and being mandated to provide abortions at their clinic, and they don't want to. So sometimes you have to break away from funders because it doesn't fit your mission anymore or your purpose, or you have to look at what your mission is or where you want to go. So lots of pieces with larger funding too.
Awesome. Our first question, and a few of you or one of you could answer the question so we can give everyone else more opportunity to speak and ask questions, comes from Google Hangout. And I just got it via text. It's from Colin. It's, what experience do you have with grant management software? It can be worthwhile for a small local government to purchase this kind of software. We have awarded more grants than we can administer and have started looking into this option.
I don't use grants management software. The software is good if it applies to your situation. We don't have enough grants that, in my opinion, that we need to have software to manage it. It just becomes onerous, and I have a tracking program that I use. I use an Excel spreadsheet, and that works fine.
You use any? We don't use any software. We have an accountant who kind of oversees everything, and we know what's where, and then we know when. I think we kind of use Excel, and we have schedules, so we know when certain grants are done. Because some they'll give you money, and then you have to wait a year before you can apply again, or 2 years, or 5 years. So we have a scheduling kind of idea in mind, but we don't have a software program per se. They're pricey things that cost money. We find we can write it down and save a lot of money. So.
For my point of view, I use it in one job. I'll use an Excel spreadsheet because there's really nothing better than it. Just remembering to lock your columns is very important in your cells, because if someone changes something and you get all off, that's really screwballish. New York State uses a very, very comprehensive system to administer all of their grants. If you have a New York State contract, you have to understand their grants process and their grants system. Yeah, and then you go through Grants Gateway, and there's a whole load of things you have to do with that.
We're part of that. We use that from them.
But correct. So we use that though because we have to track every quarter how our money is spent, and we have to use it for all our acronyms. We have a little manual that has a list of 75 acronyms and what they mean and what they lead you. Frankly, I think the grants management systems as a whole overcomplicate a very simple point. Stay on track, do as your contract says, and don't go off course.
Calendar's really helpful. make sure the report gets there in time, make sure, we do things the way it's supposed to.
Cool. Does anyone in person and not over the computer have any questions? Thoughts?
It's a lot to take in.
Any of the panelists have like a final, push or plug or thought for future grant writers or grant reviewers?
No, I have a question for
Yeah.
you. Are any of you planning on going into the grant writing field? Or you're thinking about it?
Well, I want to go into development for nonprofits, so
Okay.
part of that, I don't want to just do grant writing, but I
Okay.
am part of that.
Look at development. Good, they need you.
Good.
They absolutely
I need a
you.
job, so.
More and more today, not-for-profits, they need someone with the expertise and the ability to go find money, whether it be developing fundraisers or whether it be doing grant writing. Because the executive directors are just overburdened with all of this stuff that they have to do. And they don't have time to do it. So they need people like you to go do that. And I think it's going to be more and more of a lucrative field in doing that. Anybody else? Yes.
It happens to be that when you're writing a grant, at that time, writing a proposal or grant, and when it comes to practical field, things do not turn out to be exactly the way I planned out. That's how the reality is, and where you have to make a lot of adjustment, management, and blah, blah, blah. Sometimes there is deviation as well, if not willingly, but the situation makes you do that. So how really at that time you go into how do you account for this?
I actually had this happen with the community foundation on a grant. The timing didn't work on something that we had. As long as we were in continual communication with them and allowed them to be a part of the solution, with us, we were able to figure out a way. We just had a partnership on a program, and there was just a timing issue. We weren't going to make one deadline by about 3 weeks. And to us, we thought it was crucial, and we actually had to change the program a little bit to make it work. And we just went back to them and said, okay, this is what we thought our milestones would be. This is what, as long as we didn't deviate too far from what the funding's purpose was, they were very willing to work with us. And it ended up being a better result than we would have gone originally. But as long as you're in continual communication with the funder, it's their investment. They can make that decision with you whether or not you stop at that point or you move forward.
You're a partner. You're a partner with that grant maker, and it's important to realize that it's a two-way street. You need to be in constant communication with them. There's certain reports that some foundations require. We don't. We require a report at the end. But if something does go away, it's in your grant agreement that it's your responsibility to talk to us. And we're talking all the time. If we have a relationship, especially here in Broome County, I have a relationship with most of our grantees. And so if something is happening, they call me and we can talk about it. And I don't have the right to make the decision. That goes to the board. My board has the right to make those decisions, but I certainly have the ability to recommend to them that we do something different. And most of the time, our goal, remember, we have to give away money. So our goal is to make sure that we can work with you to make it happen, because you're doing it for a good reason. So in most cases, it'll work out.
That's where we're very thankful that foundations exist, because the state is not so friendly sometimes in the bigger grants. So when we write a grant to the state, not only are we writing our proposal, we are putting in a work plan that they are requiring, saying that we're going to do A, B, and C. We're going to do this to the best of our ability and get to this number. And throughout the year, maybe staff leaves or schools change their focus, or we can't, again, for my program specifically, maybe we can't carry out these. So by the end of that contract year or somewhere in the middle or whenever it's makes the most sense, we will do a budget modification and say we can't use the money here, and we'll request to use it somewhere else. So we weren't traveling as much because these schools didn't agree to have us in now, even though they said originally we would. So maybe we move that money over here and we hire another educator to do peer education. And we totally change our budget and our work plan and our outcome for that year or that length of the grant, either 3 or 5 years or whatever it is. So again, the communication is important, but sometimes with the state, it's more like, please, please can we do this? And with the foundation, it might just, there's more of an understanding that things aren't going to go exactly the way you put it out originally. But one of the grants that I'm currently in, we had to do our work plan in 2010 for 5 years, once. So it's 2015, lots of things have changed, but we had to, they didn't really want to modify it. They said, well, you put your work plan in, it's great. But we changed things. So then they'll call us on it later and say, why doesn't this match this? So we kept internal records of the changes. So when they do ask, we can send them. And sometimes we just send them stuff they didn't ask for because they will ask for it later. So it's a fun game that we play, but it's accountability. And you get called once, then you know, and you learn, and you start tracking more.
Any other questions, or do you guys just want to use the rest of the time to schmooze and with their panelists and to ask them questions about their organizations? It's great to have people from the community here and speak about issues on a very on-the-ground level, because a lot of times we talk about things
Can I ask a
directly.
question?
Me?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Jerry?
Yes.
Well, you had in some of the original questions maybe that you were talking about, like common mistakes in grants.
Common mistakes in grants are forgetting to put all the information in. If you read the grant guidelines, it tells you everything that we ask for. We ask for 2 years of financials. Notoriously, they will give us the last year. They won't give us their current budget. And in my case, I will go back to the organization and say, hey, you forgot it. Some foundations will just throw the application away. If you, again, there are several applications. We've gone to a common grant application in Broome County so that all of the organizations only need to fill it out once. And the important thing for the organization to remember is to change the name of the foundation at the top. But that's minor. But it helps because this way we're all getting the same information. You only have to do it once. And it can be a huge burden to the grant writer to do that. But keep not answering all of the questions and articulating the need that you have for a grant. What is it that makes your organization unique? Why do you need this grant more than someone else? And because there are 2 or 3 that do the same thing you do. Why should we give the money to you? Most of them are really dumb mistakes, like you forgot to do something. But I've had one where they wrote the grant and it was completely, we require a meeting so that we don't want you to go through and do all of this paperwork when it's a waste of your time and my time. But I've had one recently that we had the meeting and then the grant request I got was nothing like the meeting went. And it was one of those where I called them up and I said, do you realize what you've done? And they said, yeah, well, we changed our mind, but we met with you and it sounded like a good idea. Well, that's not going to work. So I didn't even consider that grant. So those are the common mistakes.
Yeah, I think it's just good to hear.
Forgetting
because
to put things
people are human error and
there.
yeah. So again, like there are checklists. So I always check the checklist. Did we get everything in? And if something's not clear, it's perfectly okay to call the foundation and say, in this part, what do you mean? And when you say table, because we're limited to 10 pages, is that table separate? Because I have narrative that I could put in place of the table otherwise. Or does that count as narrative? Those things matter because if you go over to 11 pages, they might throw it away. Or they may call and say, you're over. They're nice. A lot of people, we don't hear it all, and not us, but we write the grants.
I don't.
But, it could be things like that would totally just cancel out, and then the agency might not, and we also, if we don't get a grant, you mentioned you get 10 no's for each yes, so we call them and say, can we meet why we didn't get it? Is that bothersome?
Yeah, I generally will not share. It really depends on the grantee.
You look great.
No.
So, and I think some of those we would ask, if we received a certain grade, why? And what can we do? Because we want to write again. So how can we improve? That's where I was kind of going. But
We don't grade, and if we give a no, which we do, I generally will not give people the reasons why. Because invariably when you do that, they will say, but we really meant this.
right.
And, and well, what was your board vote? And I mean, these are all questions that I've had, and they all know, this is a small community, so people all know the board members. So the next thing you know, they're gonna call up Ferris Akel and say, Ferris, why did you vote no? Or how did you vote on that? Why did it pass? And so I'm waiting for one. We just did it. I just didn't know last week, and I'm waiting for the individual to call because I know that they will call and ask why it was rejected. And pardon?
Set up affairs.
I will.
Sorry.
So, yeah.
So
it's
we do it just to learn. And it is hard to sit there and say, well, you didn't say it this way. Okay, and we just say, okay. We don't say, but, we just, okay. We say, oh, that's what we're saying. And we meet with people,
And that's a good point, because there are certain organizations that I will sit down with the executive director and I will tell them why. And share with them some of the thoughts that our board had. I mean, it's not gonna make it any better. They're not gonna get the grant. But at least, but it's those that I have a really good, genuine relationship with that I know are not gonna sit there and whine. Forgive me for that, but that's
good, yeah. Awesome. Thanks for that. I think that's important for them to do, the mistakes that, because it does happen.
All the time. I've missed a grant by 2 days. Literally, 2 days. And I'll tell you why, it's because I got to get an intern person to put up on that box and they actually they left it on the shelf and forgot to put it there.
and we won't accept it.
Yep.
So you have to get that in mind.
$6,000.
It's due that day. What are you all gonna do? What are you all gonna do? Are you seniors, juniors?
We're all master's students.
We're all master's students. Okay, so what are you gonna do when you're done with your master's program? Hello?
We're gonna work at a college.
Look at the college, okay, in what capacity?
I wanna work with orientation.
Oh, you're talking for an age?
I'm gonna get an
See?
answer. What do you wanna do?
I don't know.
You don't know.
No, but I think that it's good information to know how to write a grant because I'm working with the CCE office right now. They had to write grants to get funding for a lot of programs that they wanted to do. So I think no matter what area you work in, it's good to know how to write a grant.
And grants don't have to be thousands of dollars. You can write a $500 grant to get pizza for this many kids to do something. I mean, they don't have to be gazillions of dollars. So,
How about some of
It's
the other
good.
subjects?
yeah, let's do it. Work for us.
Where are you gonna go?
I am interested in international affairs, global things. So maybe start an organization that focuses on issues going on abroad. So that's my interest. I think it's important to know how to write a grant for any field you enter. So I think this is, the reason why I'm here is just to benefit myself to, when I apply for jobs, have more expertise, have more qualifications that make me different from other candidates.
I'm student in environmental policy and I'm graduating in May. So I've started looking at jobs, and even though my field doesn't directly relate to grant writing, every job opening I see has something in there about it. So,
I'm working on lots of EPA things right now.
oh really?
Trust me, lots of them.
Very difficult.
Almost all of the fun.
Yeah. It's in May.
You know, it's interesting because most corporations have a charitable giving arm. You may not know about it, but they're there. I mean, like all of the banks, we at the utility companies, they have them. Most of the large corporations do. So that there's money out there to allow you to do some of the things that you're doing, such as separating the plastic off of metal wire, which is a great move from an old utility guy. That there's an awesome opportunity there to make some money. And
A lot of money.
so there's a lot of a lot of places to go and look for money. And all you need to do is ask. Just ask your banker or ask somebody because they know where all the money is. And there's a lot of money in individuals that are looking for opportunities to invest because it's really an investment in your organization or in what you're doing.
Awesome.
And if you can partner with people too, that sometimes makes
That's
it a
right.
stronger piece. I mean, we're a nonprofit, so we're always looking, okay, if we write a grant, you want to do this piece for us because we can't do it. We can't afford to hire a counselor. So you are a counselor. So if we give your agency some money to offset some of your salary, then you can do the counseling. We're also looking, can we provide services for you? So we're always looking, can we be the subcontractor for you? Or if we look at a foundation or a grant, we're going to pool a couple agencies together and make a larger impact. If you fund this, it's going to impact this many people in this many walks of life because the three of us are working together. And I think locally, people want to see that. At the state level, they want to see it. We have 2 comprehensive adolescent pregnancy prevention grants in Binghamton County. That's kind of unheard of for the rest of the state. Some of them are, there's a few in Buffalo, but they're like by school district because they're so big. But for us to have 2 in Binghamton County, we had to show that we are going to work together and we're not going to repeat and following each other's footsteps. There's enough schools and places to go. But we refer to them because we are not a clinic and they refer to us for other things. So we have to show that in our proposal. They want to see that we're talking. Not only to the funder, but to each other.
I give one last example from my point of view. It's rolling out, and it actually crossed all of my jobs, and thankfully I have 5 of them. And but there was a thing recently in the Seattle Seahawks had a thing about having sensory-friendly kids at their game, and I happen to be the mother of 2 kids with cerebral palsy. I can tell you, I'm not going to put a label on my kid saying that she has autism. She has CP. There's a difference, but there is a true access issue. And because I work for the city, and because I also work with the county, I went, wait a second, I have relationships with the BSEMs, the BMATs, the Forum, the Arena, and Binghamton University. So in the course of 9 days, we went from, hey, the Seahawks are doing that, to we are going to be the first city, actually region in the area, to be fully sensory friendly with kids. In 10 days, we roll out the kits on Friday. Mark Newman came to us and said, here you go, the money. The Jim and Julie Beheim Foundation caught wind of it from a friend. They threw us money. I've never had foundations and individual donors throw money at us so fast, ever. And it's called, and we came up with, actually my 13-year-old kid came up with a name. She calls it Friendly Access and used the ampersand. The kids are hot. I gotta tell you, I am so, and then it was a case of who wants to go and clear the shelves at Harbor Freight because they have the earphones or the headphones for $6.99, or online they were $17.99. And it was really interesting to watch and the only reason we knew about that is because I worked at Whitespin and we used them in the scrapyard. But it was a really good example of here's a program and here's an idea on how you pull the pieces of the needs. I think it's OTs and the PTs or BOCES involved in. And if you want to know, what do you want to do with your life? Well, you're going to change it 20,000 times before you figure it out, and then you're going to change it again. But make sure you have enough people around you who are willing to play the game. Because it's a lot more fun, And I can tell you that out of all the things in the last 10 years I've done with Magic Paintbrush or any of my jobs, Friendly Access and starting a special needs hockey team, which we just did, probably the 2 best things I've done in 10 years. I'm having blessed. And all of that came from just being able to ask a question and identifying a need and being brave enough to say, yeah, we can do that. I don't know how we're going to figure it out, but let's go figure it out. And if somebody
Sets you apart.
10 days, I've literally been since September 7th till now. We have 20 kids who've never skated before, now fully decked out thanks to Alexander Ovechkin. God knows how that happened, other than one person found out about this, and here you go. You have to be willing to ask the question, answer it, and have someone say, hey, can I? And then answer the questions back to them. And then but don't tell them what you think they want to hear. Tell them the truth. And if the truth works, then you're going to have something that's going to invest in you, which will build you up and give you the confidence you need to take that next step. And there's my passion plea for just don't, why should you know what you're going to do? just be willing to do something. And make sure it's worthwhile, and make sure you include others, and make sure you ask. And don't be afraid of asking money. I don't know if you know that your student president for all of SUNY is a BU student, you know that? Tom Mastro. Tom works for me. He's worked for me since he was a senior in high school. He came to me because the student assembly needed money. I looked at him, I said, you need to go back and talk to some people. You need to learn how to lobby. And he never knew what the second floor meant. Now he knows what the second floor means, and he has worked that second floor well. Now I think he's going to be president of the United States. He's brilliant. He's done everything he's supposed to. But he just had to ask. How do I ask? Well, I'm good at math. It's a great place to start. I'm sorry, I just preached.
No, I commend you for that. Yesterday, we had a presentation by Rich Harwood, and he was saying the exact same thing. If you're gonna change a community, you just gotta do it. You know, we spend so much time around here thinking about, well, where are we gonna get the money for this? We can't do this because we don't have the money for it. Well, if someone has the courage to say, we're gonna do this, they'll find the money.
Oh, yeah.
And it will come. This is one of the greatest, you know, I spent 30 years in the business world, in the corporate world, and did extremely well. But I'll tell you, these past 13 years have been a blast for me. I've learned a lot. I've been able to help others from my business background, and we're making a difference. And I think that's, you know, that's something that we all want to do. It's just a matter of how we go about doing it. So, you know, just explore your passions, and it'll happen.
Whether you end up in nonprofit or away from nonprofit, don't forget about nonprofits. You know, I think a lot of people like corporate, well, they just make things happen and they make widgets, and that's great. I would love to make a widget someday because it would be a start and a finish. I don't have a start and a finish in my job because I have one thought that turns into a gazillion thoughts and turns into, and you just, I think about this job all day long and all night long, and it's in a healthy way. I mean, it's like, I like look at how lights turn on, and that might save us money in our building. It's crazy things like that. But nonprofits can do things that corporate can't, or that they don't want to, maybe, you know. And so, and there are plenty of people in nonprofit. There's always been a stigma that I hear, like, oh, well, why aren't you just a teacher? When I go into a classroom as the guest speaker, I don't want to be a teacher. You have to stay in this room all day, every day for 30 years. I go in 8 counties. I go to jails. I go to detention centers. I mean, so my realm is different, and who I'm impacting is different. You know, so I chose it. I didn't end up in it because I couldn't do something else. Like, nonprofits matter. So that's my preaching because
I'll say for for-profit business, it's much.
Yeah, there's a bottom line. In nonprofit, we're like, we don't know where the line is. We're all over the place. We have an idea, and we're like impassioned to do it. And how do we get there? And we're going to stumble, and we're going to pick up people along the way and say, hey, you have an idea? Jump over here. Like, Nick, call it.
I'm going to leave
you know, things like that.
I'm going to leave some cards, some business cards. If you got a question, feel free to call me or email me. My email address is on there. And if you don't use them, throw them away because I got a whole box of them.
So night classes start in 1 minute.
Oh.